Let's begin. Imagine you paid $12,000 for a VIP ticket to the most exclusive party in the world. You were promised supermodels on yachts, gourmet chefs, and private jets. You show up and they hand you a wet mattress, a processed cheese sandwich in a foam container, and point you toward a disaster relief tent that's slowly flooding. You're not in paradise. You're in a gravel pit in the Bahamas, and your wallet is screaming. This isn't a hypothetical. This is what happens when Silicon Valley move fast and break things. Energy collides with influencer fake it till you make it culture, all run by a man who couldn't organise a 2-car funeral. You weren't just sold a ticket, you were sold a lie, wrapped in an Instagram filter, and funded by venture capital that was apparently drunk. This is the story of Fyre Festival. 1. The Millennial Madoff. Before you can have a historic dumpster fire, you need an architect of incompetence. Meet Billy McFarland. Imagine a hamster that learned how to use a pitch deck. By 2013, Billy was already practicing his signature move, selling rich people access to things that didn't exist. His first major venture was Magnelis, a black card for important millennials. For a $250 a year fee, members got a heavy metal credit card. It wasn't a credit card, you had to link your actual bank card to it, that supposedly unlocked a world of VIP parties, discounts, and exclusive events. Here's the financial lesson that nobody seemed to learn. Magnesis was just Fyre Festival in miniature. It was a subscription service to a feeling. Billy promised members tickets to Hamilton or exclusive parties, took their money, and then just hoped he could find tickets later. When he inevitably couldn't, he'd just cancel, or worse, use new member money to pay for old member complaints. This is a classic Ponzi scheme, but dressed in a Supreme hoodie. He wasn't selling a product, he was selling the idea of being the kind of person who gets invited to things. He was arbitraging social anxiety. By the time Magnesis collapsed under the weight of its own undelivered promises, Billy had already learned his lesson. It's not about if you can deliver, it's about how long you can promise before you have to run. He wasn't a tech founder, he was a con artist who realised FOMO, fear of missing out, was a more valuable commodity than gold. 2. The app nobody asked for. Here's the detail that makes the whole Fyre saga so much dumber. The festival was never the point. The actual business was an app. The Fyre app. By 2016, Billy McFarland had teamed up with his new celebrity best friend J. Rule, a man whose primary business expertise was being really famous in 2002. The app was supposed to be Uber for celebrities. Seriously, it was a digital booking platform where you could supposedly log on and just hire a model, a rapper, or an artist for your private party. Want Kendall Jenner at your kid's bar mitzvah? There's an app for that. The Fyre Festival was conceived as the most expensive, insane marketing campaign in human history. It was a $25 million party designed to promote a $10 million app. This is a finance lesson in what venture capitalists call customer acquisition cost, or CAC. A normal company might spend $50 to get a new user. Billy's plan was to spend millions on yachts and models, hoping that the vibe would be so powerful people would just download his app. It's a business plan that makes no sense. They were burning cash to acquire customers who would then use the app to burn more cash. It was a feedback loop of pure, uncut vanity. It's like taking out a $100,000 loan to buy a billboard that just has your face on it smiling. The festival wasn't a business. It was a symptom of a venture capital system that had stopped funding products and started funding narratives. And Billy, bless his fraudulent heart, could spin one hell of a narrative. 3. The orange tile that broke the internet. On December 12, 2016, the grift went digital, and it was beautiful. If you were on Instagram that day, you saw it. A simple, solid, burnt orange tile. Nothing else. It was posted simultaneously by every influencer who mattered. Kendall Jenner, who was allegedly paid $250,000 for the one post, Bella Hadid, Hailey Bieber, Emily Ratajkowski, and a whole army of C-list models. 400 influencers in total, posting the void. It was an act of pure marketing judo. It was mysterious, it was exclusive, it was everywhere. This was the financial lesson of the modern age. You don't need a product, you need a hype cycle. Billy and Ja Rule understood that in 2016, influence was the only currency that mattered. They didn't buy ad space, they bought people. They weaponized FOMO on a global scale. That orange tile was a digital dog whistle. It said, "We know something you don't. We're going to a party and you're not." The campaign was a massive success. It broke the internet. But it was also the first invoice in a stack of lies. The influencers were paid to promote a cultural experience, but what they were really selling was a non-existent paradise. Every influencer who tagged Fyre Fest was, knowingly or not, a salesperson for a scam. They were renting their trust and credibility to Billy McFarland for a 5 or 6 figure check. Turns out trust is expensive to build but incredibly cheap to sell. For the island of no we can't. The entire sales pitch for Fyre Festival hinged on a single intoxicating lie. It was being held on Pablo Escobar's private island. This wasn't just a location, it was a vibe. It promised danger, sexiness, and exclusivity. The promotional video, filmed in late 2016, was a masterpiece of empty glamour, featuring supermodels wandering a tropical paradise. The problem? That paradise, Norman's Cay, wasn't Billy's. And the owners, who were not Pablo Escobar, had one very simple rule. You're not allowed to mention Pablo Escobar. It's bad for the island's brand. So what does Billy do? In the very first line of the promotional materials, he screams, "Pablo Escobar's private island." He was promptly and correctly kicked off. The festival, which had already sold thousands of non-refundable tickets, no longer had a venue. This is like selling tickets to a Super Bowl in a stadium that hasn't been built, on land you don't own, while insulting the landlord. Their solution. They found a spot on Great Exuma. It wasn't a private island paradise. It was a half-finished development site near a sandals resort. It was a gravel pit. The finance lesson here is about unrealizable assets. Billy was selling a fantasy, but the logistics were based in reality. He was promising a 1000s steak and hadn't even secured a hot dog stand. He was selling the sizzle of an international drug lord's lair, but all he could deliver was the stench of a construction site's portable toilet. 5. The cheese sandwich pitch deck. How do you get $27.4 million from sophisticated investors to fund a gravel pit party? You lie. You lie with spreadsheets. Between 2016 and 2017, Billy McFarland was on a desperate hunt for cash. The Fyre app wasn't making money, and the festival was a black hole for dollars. So he did what any rational founder would do. He massively inflated his company's value. He sent wire fraud-level documents to investors, claiming Fyre Media was worth $90 million. He claimed they had millions in artist bookings. One investor, a woman named Carola Jane, was convinced to pump in $4 million, and here's the financial lesson. Pro forma is Latin for "we're making this up." Billy's pitch decks were works of pure fiction. He claimed to have a $50 million insurance policy as for cancellation. He didn't. He claimed to be booking $30 million in talent. He wasn't. It was the same logic as his Magnus's black card. If you project wealth, people will give you wealth. It was a classic fake it till you make it strategy. But he forgot the make it part. He was just faking it. He used doctored documents and the sheer blinding charisma of a man who believes his own BS to convince people to give him money. Investors were so terrified of missing the next big thing that they forgot to do the one thing they're paid to do: check the actual math. They were funding a hurricane, and Billy was the guy selling beachfront umbrellas. 6. The sound of inevitability and Blink-182. As April 2017 approached, the entire Fyre team was living inside a "this is fine" dog meme. while the house burned down around them. The logistical problems weren't just problems, they were mathematical impossibilities. They needed to house, feed, and provide sanitation for 5,000 people. They had ordered 1,000 tents, not luxury cabanas, disaster relief tents, the gourmet food promised by a celebrity chef. That contract was cancelled. The actual caterer was a local restaurant expected to provide 10,000 meals a day, with a staff of 30. The burn rate, the speed at which a company spends its money, wasn't a burn, it was an explosion. They were spending hundreds of thousands on private jets for J-Rule, but they couldn't pay the Bahamian customs office for the festival's water supply. This is a finance lesson in insolvency. It's not just about being out of money, it's about being so disorganised you don't even know what you're paying for. The canaries in this particular coal mine, the talent. Just days before the show, Blink-182, one of the headliners, pulled out. They released a statement saying, and I quote, "We're not confident that we would have what we need to give you the quality of performance we always give our fans." This is rock star code for, we showed up, saw the gravel pit, and realised you don't have a stage, electricity, or basic sanitation. We are leaving before we get cholera. When a band famous for songs about teenage angst thinks your operation is too immature, you're in spectacular trouble. 7. The Yellow Bus to Nowhere. On April 27, 2017, the first wave of guests landed in the Bahamas. They were promised a seamless VIP experience. They got a school bus. Imagine you just dropped $10,000 on a ticket. You're vibrating with excitement, expecting a leather-seated SUV with chilled champagne. Instead, you're crammed onto a yellow school bus, sweating through your designer brand we can't afford to mention, for a 2-hour ride to... Well, nobody was sure. The first stop wasn't the festival. It was a random beachside restaurant, basically a holding pen, where organisers plied guests with free alcohol for hours, desperately trying to stall while the festival site literally fell apart. This is a finance lesson in floating the check, but for logistics. In business, this is called stalling. Billy didn't have a product, so he offered a distraction. He was the kid who sets a small fire in the kitchen to distract his parents from the F he just got on his report card. When the buses finally did arrive at the private island, it wasn't a beach. It was the gravel pit. And as the sun went down, the lights didn't come on. There was no power, no organisation, just hundreds of confused, wealthy millennials being dumped in a dark field, luggage and all, with no one to tell them where to go. The vibe wasn't exclusive party, it was refugee camp. Number 8, the sandwich that launched 1,000 lawsuits. The promise, gourmet meals prepared by celebrity chefs. The reality? This. You know the picture. It's a modern masterpiece of misery. It became the defining image of April 27, 2017. 2 slices of sad, processed cheese on a piece of equally sad, untoasted bread with a side of wet lettuce served in a styrofoam container. This wasn't just a bad meal. It was a metaphor for the entire event. It was the physical manifestation of a lie. The financial lesson here is supply chain failure, and it's a brutal one. The caterer who was promised millions, they had been fired. The new local caterer was given an impossible task: feed thousands of people with no money, no infrastructure, and no time. This sandwich is what happens when your assets, the gourmet food, were never assets at all. They were just words in a pitch deck. You can't eat a vibe. You can't drink influence. At some point, you have to deliver an actual physical product. And when Billy's vision finally had to be translated into a thing, this was it. The sad, damp sandwich is the end result of a business built on nothing but buzzwords. It's what happens when you spend all your money on models and forget to buy, food. Turns out you can't pay a grocer with Instagram exposure. 9. Lord of the Tents. So where were these VIP guests supposed to sleep? Not in the luxury villas and geodesic domes they'd paid for. Those didn't exist. Instead, what greeted them in the dark was a sea of white tents. These weren't glamping. These were, and this is a direct quote from the people who set them up, FEMA-grade disaster relief tents. And because this was all happening in a tropical climate after a rainstorm, they were soaking wet. The beds were just mattresses, also soaking wet, thrown on the floor. There weren't enough. Luggage, which was supposed to be delivered by white glove service, was literally tossed from the back of a shipping container into the darkness. What happened next was a speed run of societal collapse. It was Lord of the Flies for people who use summer as a verb. People stopped being influencers and became survivors. They were running through the dark, grabbing any mattress they could find, claiming tents, fighting over the few bottles of water and stealing toilet paper. The financial lesson is simple. When you fail to manage resources, chaos is your only dividend. Billy wasn't just bad at finance, he was bad at reality. He thought he could just will a luxury city into existence on a gravel pit. He was wrong. And the people who bought his lie? They were the ones left holding a wet mattress in the dark, realizing their $12,000 ticket had just bought them a front row seat to the end of the world. 10. The Great Bahamian Evacuation. By the morning of April 28, 2017, the festival was, to use a technical term, over. The guests, who had just survived a night of frantic mattress grabbing, woke up to a new, sun-drenched horror. They were trapped. There was no music. There was no food. And now, there was no escape. They swarmed the local airport only to find nothing. The airport was tiny. It couldn't handle a sudden influx of 5,000 desperate hungover influencers. Flights were cancelled, delayed, or non-existent. The scene at the airport was somehow worse than the festival site. People were locked in the terminal, which had no air conditioning, no food, and no water, for hours on end. Fights broke out. People fainted. It was a humanitarian crisis scaled down to the size of an airport gate. This is a finance lesson in contingency planning, or in Billy's case, the total lack of it. He had a plan to get everyone in, but zero plan to get anyone out. This is the business equivalent of building a 100-story skyscraper with no fire escapes. He had taken their money, and now he had abandoned them. Billy, meanwhile, wasn't there. He was on a plane back to New York, reportedly telling his team that this is not my fault. The captain wasn't just going down with the ship. He'd taken the first lifeboat and was already rowing away, leaving everyone else to drown in a sea of styrofoam containers. 11. The grift after the grift. You'd think after orchestrating the most visible social disaster of the decade, a person would lay low. Maybe take up whittling. Not Billy McFarland. In June 2017, just weeks after the Bahamas catastrophe, while he was out on bail for the first set of fraud charges, Billy launched a new company. It was called NYC VIP Access. I am not joking. He was using the exact same Fyre Festival email list to sell, wait for it, exclusive access to events like the Met Gala, Burning Man, and the Victoria's Secret fashion show. He was selling tickets that once again he did not possess. This is a financial lesson in, well, it's not a lesson, it's a pathology. This is like a bank robber holding up a bank, getting arrested, and then, while out on bail, trying to rob the same bank while wearing the same mask. He was targeting the very people he had just scammed. It was pure, uncut audacity. He roped in at least one videographer from the fire debacle, set up a fake office to impress investors, it was a rented WeWork, and started selling $2,500 tickets to events he had no access to. This wasn't a pivot or a new venture. This was a compulsion. Billy McFarland wasn't a failed entrepreneur. He was an active, practicing con artist who was fundamentally incapable of not scamming. He didn't just burn the house down. He came back to the ashes to see if he could sell the smoke. 12. The cost of influence. The festival was over, but the financial wreckage was just beginning. By 2018, the lawsuits were stacked as high as the wet mattresses. 8 lawsuits, including one seeking $100 million in damages, were filed almost immediately. But the real victims weren't just the ticket holders, it was the local Bahamian businesses. A restaurant owner named Marianne Roll, who ran the small beachside joint where guests were held on day one, had to feed thousands of people. She used $50,000 of her own life savings to pay her staff and cover costs, based on promises from the fire team that they'd be reimbursed. They never were. She was financially ruined. This is the dark side of disruption. When a tech bro flies in with insane vision and a mountain of someone else's money, the people left cleaning up the mess are always the locals. Billy's dream was their nightmare. And what about the influencers? The $250,000 post from Kendall Jenner, the models frolicking on the beach. The US Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, came knocking. They started fining the influencers for failing to disclose they were paid to promote the festival. This was a landmark moment. For the first time, the SEC was treating an Instagram post like a financial security, a paid advertisement. The orange tile wasn't just a vibe, it was a violation. The whole debacle put a price tag on authenticity, and it turns out it's about $250,000. 13, the $27.4 million hangover. By October 2018, the party was officially, legally, and federally over. Billy McFarland stood in a US federal court, and the judge was not impressed with his vibe. Billy wasn't just there for the cheese sandwich. He was there for the whole meal. He pleaded guilty to 2 counts of wire fraud for the festival. Then, he pleaded guilty to 2 more counts of fraud for the NYC VIP access scam he ran while out on bail. And just for good measure, he also pleaded guilty to lying to federal investigators by providing fake documents. The man was a fraud-generating machine. The financial lesson here is compounding interest, but for felonies. Billy's lies stacked up. The prosecution wasn't just mad about a failed party, they were mad about a pattern. They pegged the total loss to investors and vendors at a staggering $27.4 million. The judge called him a serial fraudster and dropped the hammer. 6 years in federal prison. This is the moment the move fast and break things philosophy hits a brick wall called reality. You can't disrupt federal wire fraud laws. You can't pivot your way out of a prison sentence. Billy's greatest talent was selling a fantasy, but the judge could only see the bill, and that bill was finally due. 14. The War of the Documentaries. You'd think prison would be the end of the story, but in January 2019, the Fyre Festival scam entered its final, most bizarre phase. It became content. Within a single week, 2 rival documentaries dropped. Hulu released Fyre Fraud, and Netflix released Fyre, the greatest party that never happened. The entire world, which had watched the disaster unfold on Twitter, now got to binge-watch the backstory. It was the ultimate irony. The event that was created to be a viral marketing campaign became a viral sensation for being a total failure. The financial lesson? There is no such thing as a bad story, as long as it gets good streaming numbers. The documentaries exposed the entire grift, from the pitch deck to the cheese sandwich. But they also did something else. They turned Billy McFarland from a simple criminal into a character. He became the folk hero of the scam era. It also raised a nasty question. Were we, the audience, any better than the influencers? We were all consuming the schadenfreude, the joy of watching rich kids suffer in a gravel pit. The Fyre Festival wasn't just a business failure, it was a cultural mirror. It showed us a world obsessed with images, desperate for access, and perfectly willing to buy a $12,000 ticket to a party that was only ever real on Instagram. 15. The Phoenix who is still on fire. And now, the ending, or rather, the sequel. In March 2022, Billy McFarland was released from prison. He served about 4 years of his 6-year sentence. Did he find humility? Did he learn his lesson? Did he decide to live a quiet life of accounting? No, of course not. He immediately got on TikTok. He started a new brand. He announced with zero irony a new venture. It's called PCRT. That's pirate. Like a pirate, but spelled by someone who thinks fire is a good name. He's promising, you guessed it, exclusive access to parties, a private island, and a new decentralized adventure. He is, literally, trying to run the same play again. This is the final, most disturbing financial lesson of Fyre Festival. For some people, the grift never stops. The market for exclusive, VIP, once-in-a-lifetime nonsense will always exist, because the fear of missing out is a more powerful motivator than the fear of getting scammed. Billy McFarland didn't just swindle investors, he exposed a fundamental weakness in our culture. He proved that if you promise a party that's cool enough, people will pay for the ticket before you've even booked the band, or the island, or the water. Anyway, that's how you build a $27 million bonfire of vanity. Subscribe before you buy a ticket to his next island.